So Disney has just celebrated its 100-year anniversary, and boy, has it been a disappointing year for Disney. Well, not only this year, but pretty much the entire 2020s has been very hard for Disney. They've experienced a string of flops at the box office, the attendance at the theme parks are down, and we're currently in the middle of an ongoing actor strike. With everything going on with the company, I've seen a lot of videos heralding the demise of Disney as a company. Disney is dead. Disney's downfall. But is Disney really dying, or are you just not 10 years old anymore? Because as someone who's always been very fascinated with Disney as a company and have followed their history over the decades, I have to tell you, the headline that Disney is dying is a headline that could have been printed in the 50s, in the 80s, hell, even in the early 2000s. The conversations we're having right now about Disney as a company are not new, and a lot of the problem Disney is facing aren't new either. It seems that we keep having these same conversations about Disney, yet they never stick. No matter how many times we think it's the nail in the coffin, Disney persists as a juggernaut in the entertainment industry for years. But I do want to be clear, Disney is facing a problem. Even Bob Iger has acknowledged that. What has frustrated me is the eagerness of people who think this is the demise of the company. Disney as a company has always been plagued with financial issues. The idea that the economic downturn Disney is currently experiencing, with its stock plummeting and the barrage of underperforming films, is somehow unprecedented in the company's history is simply not true. I think we have a bad habit of romanticizing and pedestalizing the past to the point where when we look back at it, we only ever highlight the great achievements of the company while completely overlooking the fact that those great peaks in the company's history were accented by periods of persistent failures. I find that to also be the case whenever people talk about Walt Disney's tenure at the company. Walt Disney was a very complicated figure. Depending on who you ask, you get very polarizing opinions on him. To some, he was a saint and visionary, and to others, he was a ruthless, cutthroat businessman. Still, despite that, it is indisputable that he accomplished a lot to push the possibilities of filmmaking and animation. His vision not only saved Disney as a company from ruin, but also changed the landscape of animation and film. Still, I do think that in critiquing and analyzing Disney's current struggles, people tend to pedestalize Walt's tenure at the company as infallible and the peak of Disney's creative and financial success in order to malign whatever projects the company currently releases. And I think it's such a lazy analysis to look at something from decades ago and just say that it was so much better than any contemporary releases. Listen, I definitely have several critiques of the Disney company, both from a moral perspective and from a creative perspective. I don't disagree that there are problems with the current projects that Disney has released. I don't deny that there has been a tangible decline in the box office success. There have been a few animated movies that have not only underperformed at the box office, but have also been critically reviewed. But the interesting thing about this is that this is also true of Walt Disney's time as head of the company. The Disney company was started by two brothers, Walt and Roy Disney, in 1923, and they've always struggled financially. In fact, Disney was on the verge of being completely shut down in the 1930s, but Walt took a very expensive gamble on creating the very first feature-length animated movie, Snow White. The movie cost over $1 million to make, and Disney had to secure many loans just to complete the film. It was a risk that, if failed, would have been the end of Disney as a company. Luckily, the movie went on to be one of the highest-grossing animated movies of all time, grossing over $400 million. In fact, Snow White earned the company so much money, they were able to open their own animation studio in Burbank. And that kind of monumental success coming off such a huge risk is quite literally the stories of movies. So I can see why so many people's idea of who Walt Disney was is so heavily skewed, and why they think his impact on the company is above critique. However, despite the fact that Walt has saved the company, pushed it into new ventures with theme parks, which again was another huge risk that cemented himself as not only an animation pioneer, but also a true American entrepreneur, he also had some troubled times at Disney. The very next movie that Disney put out was Pinocchio, and while it wasn't a complete failure, it definitely did not live up to the success of Snow White, and even performed below its projected box office gross, despite costing more than twice as much to produce than Snow White. Bambi also initially underperformed at the box office because it was released during World War II, and Disney did not have access to European markets. It wasn't until 10 years later that Bambi made a significant amount of money. However, Disney also had to deal with a strike. During the 1940s, due to the Great Depression, there were labor disputes at Disney Animation Studios regarding pay. Animators were overworked and underpaid, sometimes working longer than 40 hours a week. And after the box office failures of Pinocchio and Fantasia, many animators were fired. Disney was very anti-union and prevented his animators from unionizing. He believed that workers should be determined, hardworking, and above all else, unselfish. He hoped that his workers would have enough faith in what he was trying to accomplish that they would not go on strike. but that failed. In 1941, during production on Dumbo, 200 employees went on strike. Tensions between Walt and the employees were high. Eventually, they were able to form a union. Walt remained very angry with the union workers, and some of them were even drawn into caricature clowns in the Dumbo movie. So if you think Walt Disney would respond any differently to how Bob Iger is during the actors and writers strike, you'd be wrong. During the 1940s, Disney produced a series of propaganda films to aid the war efforts, and because of the war, the company was on the verge of bankruptcy until the 1950s with Cinderella. Just like Snow White, Cinderella saved the company from financial ruin, but after Alice in Wonderland was released, it was not well received and incurred $1 million loss for the company, and then came 1959's Sleeping Beauty. Sleeping Beauty in modern times is considered one of Disney's classics and is revered for its animation and storytelling, but the movie was actually a devastating failure for the Disney company. The movie received mixed reviews from critics who were critical of its plot and characters, and the movie was also a box office bomb. Sleeping Beauty was the most expensive animated movie the studio had ever made, with a budget of approximately $6 million, losing the company almost $1 million. The failure of the movie was so devastating that it said that it discouraged Walt from being as involved in the animated department altogether. In fact, after the failure of Sleeping Beauty, there were several talks of shutting down Disney Animation Studio. Shortly after, Walt spent all his energy into developing his theme park, and the last project he worked on before he died was Epcot, his vision of the future. Walt would pass away in 1966, and Disney would continue to put out movies. Some did well, and some didn't. There was an extended period in the 70s and 80s where Disney animated releases weren't doing so well. In fact, one of these movies, The Black Cauldron, was such a failure for the company that it earned the title The Movie That Almost Killed Disney. It had a budget of $44 million and only earned a little over $20 million at the box office. That string of bad luck for the studio ended when Michael Eisner took over in the mid-80s. Under his leadership, Disney would herald in what would become to be known as the Disney Renaissance. This was truly a return to form for the animation studio, a period where they released hits after hits that were either financially successful, critically acclaimed, or both. I think the Disney Renaissance really proved that Disney was still capable of creating compelling stories that people wanted to see. So it's frustrating to see people in contemporary time bemoaning the fact that Disney had not taken any creative risks since the 40s. In my opinion, the stories we got from Disney during this time were some of the best we've ever gotten from the studio. And yes, in my opinion, even better than the animated films made during Walt Disney's time. But even during these great years for Disney, I still think people do tend to have a very incomprehensive scope about its run, because not every Disney Renaissance film was an amazing success. Pocahontas was not well received and got a lot of criticism and backlash from the Native American population about their depiction of indigenous people. The Hunchback of Notre Dame, a movie that I actually enjoyed, though at times found to be very inconsistent in its tone, going from dark and serious to light and optimistic in a flash, did not exactly perform well at the box office. Even Hercules, which in recent times have become a standout and favorite for many in the Disney Renaissance, underperformed at the box office, earning less than Disney's previous releases, Pocahontas and The Lion King. In fact, Hercules underperformed so badly that Disney's stock fell significantly. The only reason we refer to that period of time as the Renaissance was because it was predated by a string of failures for the Disney animated studios, a period where they constantly put out underperforming, critically panned films. So it's always so frustrating hearing people complain about the downfall of Disney, because Disney has been experiencing downfalls for years. It seems like every couple decades the company is on the verge of collapse, and I understand the reaction from people my age to Disney's recent failures and thinking that this is signaling the demise of Disney as a corporation, because if you weren't alive in the 80s or at the turn of World War II in the 40s, where Disney was experiencing a lot of economic failures, it is really easy to think that the recent failures we're seeing coming out of the Disney company means that Disney is dying, because for a lot of us, our entire lives, Disney was synonymous with entertainment. Whether that be through animation or at their theme parks, Disney was just always a part of our lives and always seemed too big to fail. But the truth of the matter is, Disney experienced their biggest growth and commercial success during the 2010s, during our childhoods. So even when we look back at the 90s or even the 40s, Disney's most profitable time were with us. But of course, when we're kids growing up and watching and engaging with the content, we're not thinking about how well these movies performed, we're just enjoying them. And so I think for a lot of us, this really is our first time experiencing Disney not being at the top of their game. So seeing so many releases from them fail at the box office or fail to capture the public's attention in the way that they did when we were kids, or in the way that we were told that they did earlier in the Disney's history. But I need you guys to understand that this is not new. It's just new to us. One of the long-standing critiques I've seen people make as to why they think Disney is dying is that they are hyper-capitalistic and are not making decisions motivated by fostering creativity. And to that I'd say, that's always been Disney. I think it is such a grossly inaccurate representation to insinuate that Disney has just now been a profit-facing company that makes decisions based on what would give them the greatest return on their investments, because at the end of the day, Disney is a business, so every creative decision is made with the assumption that there will be a financial incentive. Hell, when Walt made that very risky decision to make a feature-length animated movie, a large part of his motivation was to make enough money from the film to save his company. He believed in it so much that he took out loans and mortgaged his own home. In fact, Snow White wasn't even the first full-length animated movie Walt wanted to make. He wanted to actually do Alice in Wonderland, but decided to do Snow White instead because a live-action Alice movie was already made in the 30s, and so an animated one probably would not have made as much money. I do think that Disney was more willing to take creative risks that would have hurt them financially, and some of them ended up doing just that. Fantasia and Sleeping Beauty did so poorly financially that Walt himself took a step back from focusing on animation and poured all his time into his theme parks, which at the time was how Disney made most of their money. Disney is a company, and so their decisions are going to be largely motivated by what projects can turn a profit. Infamously, during the Disney Renaissance, the studio didn't think that The Lion King was going to be a big hit. They were betting all of their money on Pocahontas because that seemed like the more box office friendly movie. So that's where the studio focused most of their energy. And are we forgetting the plague of direct-to-DVD sequels and VHS copies of older animated movies that the studio released during the Renaissance to capitalize on the popularity of those movies? The direct-to-DVD movies in the 90s in a lot of ways is very similar to what Disney is doing now with the live-action remakes, which is taking a property that they know people love and creating more projects around that property that are worse in quality to make more money. I say all of that to say that we can 100% be critical of Disney as a company for prioritizing profits, but let's stop pretending as if this is a modern issue. Disney was still able to create new and compelling stories, and therein lies the balance that the studio tried to strike, ensuring that they can profit on their investments while also telling good original stories. And even though there's been an onslaught of sequels and remakes, Disney is still making original content. Take for example Wish. When the trailer for Wish came out, so many people instinctively came out complaining about the film, its characters, the plot, the animation, and I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with having a negative first impression. That's the point of trailers, to give you a first impression of a movie, but it just felt like people were so quick to dismiss this movie based on one trailer. How many times have we seen bad trailers for what turned out to be great movies? And I have to say, I do appreciate the movie's animation style. I know a lot of people don't like it, but I think that it's something interesting and new, something we've never seen before, a melding of 2D and 3D animation with beautiful watercolors. It makes the movie feel very distinct to every other Disney princess movie, which is what I thought people wanted. And I know some people wanted Disney to go back to traditional 2D animation, but there's a lot of reasons why that's never gonna happen. One, computer animation is less time consuming and give you a faster turnaround. And two, there was an extensive period of time where computer animated movies were outgrossing 2D animated movies at the box office, so studios think that that's what people actually want. But here we have at least an attempt to do something different. It's a creative risk, but of course, the first instinctive response is skepticism and outrage for a movie that hasn't even come out yet. So if we want to see more original stories, more creative risk from the studio, then we have to give them a try. Otherwise, we're proving to them that live action remakes are actually the way to go. And say what you will, but Disney does have a financial incentive to continue doing the remakes because they make a lot of money. Now, I say all of that to say that while I do have several critiques of Disney as a company, from shady business dealings to downright unimaginative releases, I just really wanted to emphasize that what the company is experiencing today is not new or unique. Disney, like many other companies, experiences ups and downs, box office failures, and success. Disney's acquisition of so many IPs, its oversaturation with Marvel content, Star Wars definitely needs a new head. I think we can all agree Disney Plus was a failure, coupled with the recent box office failures, put Disney in a very precarious situation. But do I think that this is the death of Disney? No. Disney has a very diverse portfolio, even more than any other entertainment company can weather the storm. They've done it before, and they've proved themselves to be a very adaptable company. They already seem committed to doing some changes. Also, I don't think we should overlook that modern Disney has experienced some success. Again, the 2010s were the most profitable time in the company's entire history. Like Frozen, Moana, and Zootopia were less than 10 years ago, and those films did very well. Also, the entire Marvel franchise Endgame. Like, Disney has made a lot of money from movies and have experienced a monumental level of success. I think it's only natural that after that period of monumental success that Disney would have to face some kind of lull. So I think we can make our critiques. I'm definitely on board for holding Disney accountable for their wrongdoings, but I do think our analysis has to be more comprehensive. This is the gut reaction so many people seem to have, to immediately dismiss every recent release and just say the 2010s or the 90s or the 40s were better just because they were older, is lazy analysis. We can do better. Michael Eisner said it best. We can respect the past without revering it. It actually makes me think how maybe 60 years from now, people will look back at a movie like Wish and think it was one of the greatest pieces of animation ever, regardless of how well it does. The Disney Renaissance and Walt Disney did a lot to bolster Disney's image, but even they were flawed. I, for one, have always been inspired by Disney's ability to bounce back from consecutive failures. And while the 2020s have not been great to Disney, I don't think it's time to put the nail in the coffin just yet. I definitely think they'll be around for another couple of years. Whether that's a good or bad thing remains to be seen. So let me know what your thoughts are down below. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.